Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review from the original Are You Afraid of the Dark television series. This episode comes from season 7, the final season, and the final original revival run of seasons as well. This episode was written by Mark D. Perry and was directed by Jim Donovan. And the episode in question is The Tale of the Last Dance. Now, I remember actually watching this on Nickelodeon way back in the day. I had a vague memory of a specific scene involving the lair that this current watch through kind of triggered in my memory, so that was kind of fun. But a few years back, way before copyright started to become really huge on YouTube, somebody had a playlist of random full episodes, and I watched it then, and coming back to it this time, I remember bits and pieces of it, and I don't know why I didn't remember it as well. But coming back to this, I have to say this is probably one of the best made Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes I've come across in the entire show. Now, Are You Afraid of the Dark, for it being a 90s kids horror show and really birthing the kids horror craze alongside Goosebumps, there seems to be a lot of people out there that think that Are You Afraid of the Dark is better than Goosebumps in some avenues, and of course Goosebumps is better in others. But this is one of the cases that I can definitely see the argument for some things that people find more lucrative in dark. This is by all means a quintessential Are You Afraid of the Dark story in almost every way. But unlike some other ones that I think just kind of fall into that average of the kids horror medium in general, this one was exceptional, and I'm honestly shocked at the quality and the tones of this episode, and just the overall package really impressed me on this go through with this story. And I'll definitely revisit this episode. It has potential to go up in the future, which I think is really cool and positive going into this. So yeah, if you have not tried The Tale of the Last Dance, please go check this out. The reason why I checked it out specifically at this point in time was for the Goose Junkies podcast, because we're doing a Valentine's Day special going over some Valentine's Day kids horror stuff. And this honestly had some young adult, or mostly young adult flares in it that I thought was a really cool shakeup. And yeah, definitely recommend that you all go check this one out. So let's get into the plot overview of the story without giving too much away. So the story starts off like every single Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, minus the Tale of the Silverside 3-parter, where we have the Midnight Society gathering around a campfire out in the woods. In season 7, the final season, this was kind of what became the new Midnight Society, starting in season 6, where Tucker is the leader of his friend group. And this story is narrated by one of Tucker's friends. And the story starts off with kind of like a narration, because season 6 and 7 is kind of went back and forth with this, but sometimes some episodes would have narration in the beginning, sometimes it wouldn't. It just depends. But this one started off with a narration of the events, kind of giving some backstory and backdrop to what's happening. There's a school that's about to get torn down because it is very old, very run down. It has a lot of issues, and it's pretty much unsafe for kids to attend there anymore. And that leads into the main character of the story, Tara, who is playing a violin recital for her fellow peers, and her boyfriend Michael is out in the audience, and he has fallen asleep, and Tara's made note of this. But we notice that there's a perspective up in the ceiling. There's a pencil and some drool coming out, kind of falling down in the vents, that distracts Tara, and when she stops playing, that wakes up her boyfriend, and she seems to be a little bit embarrassed that her own boyfriend has fallen asleep during her recital, and she's kind of confiding into her friends about that and how annoying that is. But later on at lunch, the kids are all sitting down. They're all high school kids in this episode, mind you. All of these teenagers in this story probably are like 17 years old and are seniors. They look older than your average Are You Afraid of the Dark character for sure. They're talking about this dance coming up that is going to be called The Last Dance. And Tara has been booked to play violin at the dance, and she's really excited for this because this is going to be the final dance ever in this school building before it's torn down and given the land is given over to a shopping mall to build on the land. So Tara is putting a lot of pressure on this, and her boyfriend doesn't seem to care all that much. He's kind of self-centered and self-absorbed, and we get a sense of this when him and his buddy go off into the locker room, and he has this leather jacket, and he finds it ripped up and damaged, and he seems to be more upset about that than Tara's recital getting, interrupted earlier by something falling from the ceiling. And I should mention this now, but like in the lunchroom and around the school building, you get to see like old like moldy tiles and stuff. So the setting they picked, they actually did pick a rundown school to film in, which I thought was very impressive. And you'll notice that it's very immersive, and something is off and very creepy going on. So after Michael has his jacket damaged, Tara's in the bathroom with one of her friends talking, and she's brought her violin and sat it down next to the sink, which is next to a vent. But we see a similar POV that we saw in the beginning, and we hear some heavy breathing that's very creepy, and all of a sudden the vent breaks open and pulls Tara's violin through it. And there's a super eerie shot, and I think this is probably hands down one of the creepiest things Are You Afraid of the Dark has ever done in any of their episodes, by far. Tara and her friend are kneeling by the vent, looking into pitch black, and they just hear this breathing. That would petrify me if that happened in real life. So kudos to Dark for actually sending some shivers down my spine. I legit had goosebumps watching that scene. And I don't get impressed that easily, so good job. Good job there, show. So after Tara's violin gets snatched, she's wondering how she's going to be able to play this dance. And her boyfriend's like, well, you can always rent a violin. She's like, well, you don't understand. That violin's very sentimental to me. I played all my songs, all my recitals on it. You just don't get me. And they're kind of having some relationship qualms and all that. And that plays a factor into the night of this last dance, which should go off without a hitch. But, of course, Tara is having an issue because she doesn't have a violin. But we see this cloaked figure starting to come out right before the dance starts. He takes some food, and he finds a crumpled up picture of Tara on the ground, and is holding it in a weird way. So you get the sense that this character, which I think the Are You Afraid of the Dark wiki calls the Lurker, is obsessed with this teenage girl, which is very weird, but we'll get into that in a moment. But the dance starts, and everybody's there, all of Tara's friends. Tara's there. They're trying to enjoy themselves. But one of Tara's friends ends up getting paint spilled on her in the hallway. And while it's kind of a goofy scene, the way it looks, they try to make it look like Carrie and make it look kind of like blood. And it makes this girl scream, and which it unsettles Tara. And I should mention this entire hallway sequence at this point of the episode is so creepy and tense that you can cut the tension with a knife because you don't know what's going to happen, right? But Tara essentially ends up getting abducted and pulled into this area of below the school, essentially. And this cloaked figure is dragging her, and you see that his hands, and he has mutated hands, and his fingers look like they're morphed together, and it's gross. And you're like, oh crap, what is she about to get herself into? And while he's pulling her through this layer underneath the school, there's this huge ledge that falls into a sea of black that petrifies me. There's something about this layer that kind of reminds me of the Creepers layer from Jeepers Creepers or something. Everything about this is just eerie, man. And Tara finds herself in there, no help, and this hooded, cloaked figure wants something to do with her. Fortunately for her, back upstairs, her boyfriend Michael, listened to her friend and said, hey, I thought she went that way. And he saw an opening to a vent and kind of looked into it and said, maybe I should follow this. She could be abducted somewhere. So he decides to follow the vent. And these two storylines kind of intertwine, where Michael ends up observing an entire scene, which starts a little bit before he gets there. But essentially Tara and this hooded cloak figure start talking, and she looks around the room and she sees paintings of her, and everything seems to be very odd and morbid, and she's like very creeped out, understandably so. And then the hooded creature says, "Look, I'm a massive fan of you. You've grown into a fine young woman. I've been listening to your music for years. The school's about to be torn down. I just wanted you down here to enjoy some food, and maybe you can play me a song on the violin." He starts to kind of open up and show his softer side. And she starts to understand that this man has a kind of like a tragic backstory. And what we know about him is that, you know, he said he comes from the underworld and he has like a genetic mutation and he thinks he's hideous. And there's this whole face reveal because he wants her to play violin music, and he hands her violin that he stole. And she's like, "Well, I'll do it if you show me your face." And yeah, I won't spoil exactly what he looks like, but think Jacob from the first Twilight movie. And just with weird hands. So while she's talking with him, he's giving her kind of like relationship advice, and Michael overhears this, and he's like telling her that, you know, maybe he'll come around and all that. And Michael, you get this sense that maybe he's taken everything that's being said to heart and might want to alleviate the situation. But once he feels like things are kind of getting too far, he steps in and tries to break up the two. And all of a sudden, this is where I'm going to get into very vague territory because I don't want to spoil the climax, but this lurker starts to act very possessive of Tara, and it leads into a skirmish, and you know, Michael and Tara trying to run away, and there's like this whole over-the-top climax with, let's just say, a fight sequence, and pretty much almost a death sequence. And then once that is over, the story kind of comes full circle, and you get a sense of what this last dance is going to mean for these characters involved. And the story wraps up, and the Midnight Society, of course, wraps it up and sends it on. But one thing I can say about the Midnight Society before I get into my thoughts is that the character narrating this story obviously has a crush on one of the Midnight Society members, and it seems like he was projecting himself in the story, which I thought was kind of cool. But nonetheless, that's essentially what you're going to expect out of the tale of The Last Dance. So to start off with positives with this episode, because I have a ton here, the first thing I can commend this is for Are You Afraid of the Dark budget, a lot of the times it's hit or miss, but for some reason, this quite possibly is just the same budget as all the other episodes, but there's so much production quality that the director of this episode brought, and I am very, very, very impressed. I think his name is Jim Donovan. His ability on the camera on this tale here was exquisite. I mean, just the pan-in shots, some creative ceiling shots, and how he was able to get across a cloaked figure stalking. We see a POV of this cloaked figure stalking, like in first person, including that stuff. There's some Dutch angles in that hallway sequence I was talking about in the plot, where it's super creepy, where Tara and her friend are hearing some weird noises out in the hallway during the dance, and then her friend gets blood, or not blood, but paint that looks like blood poured onto her. There's just like this eerie tone that the director captures. And I totally got what he was going for almost immediately once the story started. The tone was just super serious the whole time. And the only time it lightened up is when it had its little goofy moments, like the paint scene or drooling and dropping a pencil. But even then, that's still kind of creepy in the context of the entire tale. And the setting choices, the team who made the backdrop and the set design, they hit it out of the park with this tale. Honestly, if you ask me, a very similar story to this would be like Phantom of the Auditorium from Goosebumps. And I thought the under the stage room, like a completely dark area, was cool. But seeing this underground thing underneath the school in this story, and seeing like how cavernous it feels and how just dimly lit it is and how it's connected to the air ducts of the school, it's so much creepier. And in a lot of ways, it really sells this story. It has a very, very dark and dreary atmosphere. And it plays into the fact that the school is run down, and I like that aspect of it. There might be a little twang of pollution going on there too, and you get a sense of that because the lurker looks mutated. So there's something about it that just feels very weird yet authentic to what it's trying to be. The acting in this story is very, very, very well done for Are You Afraid of the Dark standard. I don't think that any actor in this episode was bad. Maybe some characters were kind of annoying, like Michael, and kind of like hateable because he's just a jerk and self-centered and treats his girlfriend like crap. But the acting in this story was really good. I mean, they helped sell the experience too, and it was just a fun experience getting to see these actors go through the story and the script. I could tell that they were having fun with this one. And yeah, it's just something about it that just really clicks. It's hard to explain. For a story that's really borrowing a lot from Phantom of the Opera, I should have mentioned this way earlier. This is definitely a play on Phantom of the Opera. It does it in like a fun, fresh way that Dark is known to do. They'll take these classic tales and try to put a fresh spin on it. And this was fresh enough for its time. And I still think fresh enough for the kids' horror genre as a whole. And I like that multiple characters got to learn a lesson in this story. Not only Tara, but her boyfriend Michael as well. Both using the lurker as kind of like a catapult to get some progression. And yeah, it was just a very well made story. However, I do have some negatives with it, and these are not a lot here, but they do have some weight and significance to them here. One of the first negatives off the bat about this tale here is it's completely creepy up until the face reveal of the lurker. Once I see, okay, mild spoiler, Jacob from Twilight, the first Twilight movie, with his long hair coming from underneath the robe, it takes me out of the story. I just think that's so goofy and lame that they didn't go like a true monster route. They could have done some crazy prosthetics or makeup to make this guy look like a freaking monster. But no, they just make him look like a normal guy with long hair, and he's not even bad looking. It's just his hands, and he has like a hunchback going on. Yeah, it's just really lame. It's really lame. You get this sense of this creepiness going on the whole story, and then once you get that, I think most people that I've talked to about this episode will agree that reveal was lame. So yeah. And the second thing, okay, I have a lot to say with this one, but hear me out here. There are some icky connotations in this story. You wouldn't think so, but there is some here. And it mainly deals with this lurker who's easily in his 30s, maybe pushing 40s, obsessing over this 17-year-old girl. And apparently he's been obsessing over her since she was like a freshman or something. Very icky stuff, okay? Let's just call a spade, icky, icky, icky. But in the context of this story, it's actually surprisingly innocent. But where it becomes a negative for me, and this is kind of a two-pronged thing, it just feels like it's there, forced in there, just to create some tension between her and her boyfriend. I feel like you could have done this story without it, because there's really no thematic purpose, unlike some other similar stories I could think of, like an Old Story. Yeah, you could probably trim out the stuff that happened in that tale, but all the stuff that happens in an Old Story, from Goosebumps, for example, serves a thematic message to the story. This creature or person being obsessed with a 17-year-old girl starting when she was 14 serves no thematic purpose here. It's just there, and it's pretty much just icky for the sake of it. And it gets to me a little bit. It really does. But where I think it goes far, a little too far for me, is when her boyfriend tries to rescue her, and he all of a sudden fully commits on kidnapping her. Like, he's dead serious. He wants to keep her with him forever. Like kidnapping. And like I said, because there's no thematic message, it just comes off icky for the sake of it. Yeah, I don't really want to go further on that stuff, but yeah, those 2/2.5 things did hit a massive blow to this, to where from a 0 to 5 star basis, I would have given this an A, but those two things I cannot look past. And if I'm going to be even more harsh, but I'm not going to really deduct on it because I think it kind of works in terms of the theme of the story, the ending is kind of goofy. A little goofy. Okay? But it's unfortunate because I would have given this an A tier without those issues, but I really can't. But to be fair to this, this is easily one of the better Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes in the lineup. Easily top half, probably even top 20 of the whole show. It just has those issues that hold it back from being a great episode or an exceptional one. But I do think it's a very good one, which is between a 4 to a 4.4 for me out of 5 stars. And where I settled on this with those issues in mind, I decided to give this episode a 4.4 out of 5, which I think is plenty fair for this. I think some people might be even harsher on this episode, but I don't know. Everything about this one just clicked for the most part, minus those issues I had. I have to give it credit. I really do. Some people might give it higher. Some people might think that this is one of their most underrated episodes from the show. I think I have seen people mention that this one is one of the more severely underrated ones. And I kind of see that, y'all. And I would say this. I prefer this over Phantom of the Auditorium. I said it. But this is just, for the most part, for majority of it, a very creepy, very well-made episode. And, yeah, the story is pretty good, too. I kind of wish there was more thematic stuff to it, but still pretty good for what it was. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on The Tale of the Last Dance. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this episode before. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.